Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight. It's been 1 year since Hamas terrorists raided Israeli communities, killing over 1,000 people in a surprise attack. Families of the victims are still feeling the pain as they mark the anniversary. Jason Perry reports. President Biden declares an emergency in Florida in anticipation of another devastating hurricane. Biden also reaffirms support for Israel on the anniversary of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. Jack Bradley is at the White House. The presidential and vice presidential candidates attend events to commemorate the 2023 Hamas attacks. Vice President Kamala Harris plants a memorial tree. Former President Trump attends an event in New York and delivers remarks in Florida. With just 29 days left until the election, NTD's Dave Martin takes a look at the shift in Latino support. Is it enough to sway one candidate? And Hurricane Milton is intensifying in the Gulf of Mexico and has now become a major storm. It's moving east toward Florida, raising concerns about devastating winds and perilous storm surges.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's been 1 year since Hamas terrorists raided Israeli communities in a surprise terrorist attack. Over 1,200 people were killed and hundreds more were taken hostage. NTD's Jason Perry takes a look at the situation 1 year later. And a warning, this report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
On October 7th, 2023, what started as a music festival ended in chaos and death when Hamas terrorists raided it and other Israeli border communities. The Iran-backed terrorists killed over 1,200 people and kidnapped over 250 on that tragic day. Hamas shared this video online, which is how this couple found out their son, Omer Winkert, was alive, but in the hands of Hamas terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Omer's uncle said this about him on Monday.
We are here every week in rallies. And every day that there is a rally, about 20-30 people come to the rallies and say, I'm the best friend of Omer Winkert. If 20-30 people come and say they are the best friends of Omer Winkert, it means something about you. So it's friendly, it's warm, it's smart. This is why also I believe that he will survive.
Families of the October 7th Music Festival victims gathered at the site to mark the 1 year anniversary. They posted pictures of the victims and placed flowers and candles around them.
My son Omid was murdered here. He was 22. And he came to the Nova to dance, to enjoy his life. But the Hamas murdered him. I said to myself that if I were not to come, the Hamas will win me.
We lost our son here. He was at the party. He was murdered in 9 o'clock and 20 minutes. And we are here, all the family.
Over 360 people were killed at the festival, and many more were killed in Israeli border communities.
We're standing here on October 7th, and it's been 1 year. 1 year since in this house my father was murdered and 7 members of my family were kidnapped. After 50 days in the first deal, all the women and children returned to us. Tal's children returned to us, my sister and my mother returned to us. But my brother-in-law Tal Shoam is still in Gaza.
Also on Monday, families of hostages demonstrated near the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
It's been a year since so many Israelis were taken, kidnapped by Hamas, and they're still there. My cousin Carmel was kidnapped on October 7th, and we learned just 1 month ago that she was murdered in captivity because the deal was supposed to save her did not come in time.
Also on October 7th, the Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorist group in Lebanon fired a barrage of rockets into northern Israel, damaging houses and causing a fire, according to the Israeli military. And on the same day, the Israeli Air Force reported striking over 120 Hezbollah terrorist targets in southern Lebanon. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Lawmakers commemorate the one-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. The war has not only changed the Middle East, but reshaped congressional attitudes on the U.S. relationship with its most important Middle Eastern ally. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson participated in a October 7th commemorative event hosted by the Republican Jewish Coalition in Las Vegas, Nevada. In a statement, Speaker Johnson highlighted that at this critical time, following a second direct attack by Iran and ongoing terror from Hezbollah, Americans must insist that the Biden-Harris administration stand unequivocally with Israel and against the terrorist regime in Iran. And in a separate video, Speaker Johnson highlighted Congress's support for Israel this year.
Congress has delivered $26 billion in lethal military aid to Israel and to U.S. forces operating in the region.
Democratic lawmakers stress that the conflict is not over and that Hamas and Hezbollah are not the only adversaries standing in the way of peace in the Middle East.
1 year since October 7th, reminds me, a little bit of the 1 year after 9/11, because for Israelis, that's what October 7th was for them. But it's also still not over because you still have hostages being held in Gaza.
Here we are a year later with 7 Americans still hostage, and with all these Americans who've been killed, with Iran and its proxies continuing to attack. So we can't lose sight of Iran, which is the parent company of all this terror, who their closest allies are. They're all our adversaries: China, Russia, North Korea.
Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries posted that America's commitment to the safety and security of Israel is ironclad and unbreakable. Our support for the state of Israel, its right to defend herself and to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, is enduring and will remain bipartisan. Republican lawmakers like Congressman Mike Lawler have called for Congress to reconvene to approve new aid for Israel following Iran's missile attack last week. Despite bipartisan support for Israel in Congress, it is important to note that 58 lawmakers voted against sending foreign assistance to Israel back in April. And in July, over 100 lawmakers and approximately half the Senate Democratic Conference boycotted the speech that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave to a joint session of Congress. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Vice President Kamala Harris commemorates the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel by planting a tree on her residential grounds. NTD's Jason Blair reports.
Vice President Kamala Harris was accompanied by Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff at the Naval Observatory, where they live, to plant the tree.
And we dedicate this tree to the 1,200 innocent souls in an act of pure evil.
What happened on October 7th is seared into our souls.
Harris and Emhoff planted a pomegranate tree, which she said in Judaism is a symbol of hope and righteousness. 1 year ago, Hamas led an attack on Israel, killing at least 1,200 civilians and kidnapping another 250. The vice president also released a statement saying, "We all must ensure nothing like the horrors of October 7th ever happen again." Then, with Election Day a month away, Harris made an appearance on Alexandra Cooper's Call Her Daddy podcast on Sunday. The podcast is one of the top ranked globally on Spotify, with about 5 million downloads a week. Its highest demographic is women aged 18 to 24. Then Harris taped an interview with CBS's 60 Minutes on Saturday. The sit-down interview, done by Bill Whitaker, will air at 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday night. The vice president is also scheduled to appear on The View, The Howard Stern Show, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert this week. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former President Trump today marking the anniversary of the October 7th attacks with visits to New York and Florida. He will be standing before Jewish leaders and is expected to mourn the 1,200 lives lost. Joining us now live is NTD's Iris Tao, who's at Trump's golf resort near Miami. Good evening, Iris. What are we expecting to see later tonight?
Good evening to you, Tiff. So at around 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time tonight, former President Trump is expected to take the stage right behind us here at his golf club in Doral, Florida, for this remembrance event of the October 7th attack. The campaign says the theme of today's event is to remember the 1,200 lives lost in the attack. And also we can see the candles being set up around us and also the photos and names being displayed for not only those who are killed by Hamas, but also the current hostages held by Hamas. And of course, this morning, Trump, before coming here to Florida, also visited the grave of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, one of the most influential Jewish leaders of the 20th century, to pay his tribute. And meanwhile, the host of today's Remembrance event told me that tonight he would like to hear from former President Trump about his take on how to better speak out for the victims of October 7th attack and also encourage other world leaders to do the same. Here's a clip of that. Watch.
A year has passed with hostages still in tunnels for a year. Many families have not had proof of life. It is unbelievable and unspeakable that world leaders are ready to condemn Israel without condemning the behavior that caused this war.
And it comes as Trump is trying to reach out to more Jewish voters. In the interview this morning, Trump said that he should get 100% of the Jewish votes, adding that, quote, "I have done more for the Jewish people than anybody has." Meanwhile, Trump has also criticized the current administration's response to the wars in the Middle East, as well as the 2020 Afghanistan withdrawal, which Trump said has led to global chaos. And today we do expect Trump to keep focusing on that as well in his remarks, as we're just a month left before the election. And J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, who's also speaking in Washington, D.C. earlier today about the October 7th attack, and called on the Biden-Harris administration to do more to bring back hostages. Watch.
Vice President Harris, our message is bring them home. Use your authority to help bring them home. We can do it. We just need real leadership. We're going to resolutely stand against anti-Jewish hate, and we're going to go after the accreditation and the federal support of colleges that won't look up for their own students.
Meanwhile, President Biden today issued a statement saying that the administration has successfully negotiated for the release of more than 100 hostages, including Americans, and will keep working until everyone who is held hostage by Hamas returns home. And also, the Biden-Harris administration has been for months trying to negotiate a ceasefire deal in return for hostages returned for months. But now the progress has still been limited. Of course, the administration is vowing to keep working on that until it has been reached. Meanwhile, today, another topic that we do expect Trump to talk about will be what he calls anti-Semitism now running in American cities as well as American college campuses. So lots to watch for as we're waiting for Trump to get here from New York for this event. But of course, we know that the hurricane is impacting the Florida area. And tomorrow, one of Trump's events scheduled also at this location at Trump Doral, Miami, has been postponed due to the weather. But now this event should go on as planned. Back to you.
Iris, thank you for those updates. Vigils, rallies, and marches are held in Washington, D.C. as residents gather to commemorate the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel. Many are urging the release of hostages and calling for an end to anti-Semitism. NTD's Sam Wong has more on the story.
A very emotional day here in the nation's capital, as today marks the one-year anniversary of the October 7th terrorist attack in Israel. And here at the George Washington Monument, a crowd is gathering to stand in solidarity with the more than 100 hostages still held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
It's been a tough year, but seeing like-minded people standing in solidarity with Israel makes me feel a lot better.
I think Israel is really fighting the war for the West, because Iran would really like to destroy this country too.
It's a chain of events that plunged the Middle East into chaos. Just 1 year ago, Hamas terrorists breached the Israeli border, shocking the world with a massacre that left more than 1,000 civilians dead. Speaking on the National Mall, Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance pledged support for Israel and vowed to bring American hostages home.
There are literal pro-Hamas protesters around the country calling for a ceasefire. The only way this war is going to end is when Hamas gives up its arms and stops the fighting and lets the hostages come home.
Residents from across the D.C. area are commemorating the occasion with a march, rally, and vigil. As conflicts continue to escalate both north and south of Israel, Many are fearing for their loved ones.
So every time there's one of these huge missile attacks from Iran or from Hezbollah, my niece lives in Haifa. There was an attack on Haifa last night. It's extremely frightening.
Mother-in-law, like trying to get to a bomb shelter, an elderly person. We have people who are serving in the army right now. We have friends who were unfortunately killed during the conflict. So, yeah, it's like an everyday thing.
Some said Israel's sovereignty is a cost that's been fought over generations.
My grandfather was in Auschwitz. He ended up like having to go to Israel in '48 to fight for for Israel's independence. I think it's just very important to be here and honor kind of like the memories of those people.
Today, many world leaders are still urging for a ceasefire as Israel ramps up operations against Hamas and Hezbollah. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wang, NTD News.
Joining us now at the Election Data Hub is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, there's been a lot made of the shift in presidential support among Latino voters since the 2020 election. How much of a shift are you seeing? Where does this make the biggest difference?
Thank you, Tiff. Yeah, the shift is pretty significant. This is a growing demographic, if you will. Nationwide, there are more than 36 million Latinos who will be eligible to vote in the 2020 election. That's according to Pew Research data. That represents nearly 15% of all eligible voters nationwide, and it's a 12% increase from 4 years ago. So let's take a look at that shift over the last 4 years here. There's Latino support in the 2020 national election. Joe Biden, 65% nationwide got the support. That's 2-to-1 over what Donald Trump got. Now, fast forward 4 years, nearly 4 years. This is according to a Marist poll in September. This is Latino support now. Kamala Harris just 47%, while Donald Trump 51%. That's nearly a 37-point swing between those two. Now, of course, where does this actually come into play? Let's look at these swing states here, the all-important swing states, see if this kind of determines that. Now, these are the Latino percentage of all eligible voters. And you can see here Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia. It's between 4 and 6% of all eligible voters are Latino. Now you go out west and the number's a lot higher. Nevada, 22%. Arizona, 25%. That's nearly 1 out of 4. Now this is a very close Biden win. 4 years ago, he won by just 11,000 votes. And 11 electoral votes are up for grabs here. So let's take a little closer look in Arizona. Now, according to the exit poll data in Arizona, Biden in 2020 got 61% of the Latino vote, while Trump got 37%, so a little bit different than the national vote. And if you take a look at this New York Times Siena poll, in Arizona, Harris actually has the lead over Trump, so it's a little bit different than nationwide, where we're showing Trump actually has the lead over Harris, but they're still very close. But still, this is a big difference here. Now, this is a 12% decrease for the Democrats, a 4% increase for the Republicans. So that's a 16-point swing here for Trump. Now, I mentioned earlier, we saw earlier that 25% of all eligible voters in Arizona are Latinos. That's 650,000. That's 16-point swing out of 650,000 is 104,000 right there. Now, I also mentioned earlier, Biden won this by 11,000. So you can see how big of a difference this 104,000 comes into play. So even these somewhat small shift among demographics have major implications on this election. So that's all I've got right now. Tiff, back to you.
All right, Dave, thanks for that breakdown. The Supreme Court today issued a decision regarding a federal law that requires hospitals to perform emergency abortions. The court upheld a decision that bars hospitals from performing abortions that would violate Texas law. The justices rebuffed a Biden administration push to enforce a federal law requiring hospitals to provide emergency abortion care or risk losing federal funding. The High Court also rejected a Justice Department request to throw out the lower court ruling and send the case back down for more proceedings. Texas has one of the country's strictest abortion bans, but allows exceptions for cases with serious risks to the health of a pregnant mother. The Georgia Supreme Court on Monday halted a ruling that blocks a state abortion law while it considers the state's appeal. The state's highest court temporarily blocked a lower court ruling that strikes down the state's 6-week limit on abortions, meaning the limit is paused for now. The ruling comes a week after a lower court found the state's abortion law unconstitutional. The controversial law prohibits most abortions once a detectable human heartbeat is present, which can be detected at around 6 weeks into a pregnancy. The lower court's decision would have rolled back abortion limits to a prior law that allowed abortions until viability roughly 22 to 24 weeks into a pregnancy. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Hurricane Milton is intensifying in the Gulf of Mexico, now a powerful Category 5 storm. As it moves toward Florida, it's prompting widespread evacuation orders, with the state still recovering from the impacts of Hurricane Helene just 2 weeks ago. NTD's Christina Corona brings us the latest update.
Milton rapidly strengthened in the Gulf of Mexico on Monday, becoming a Category 5 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 175 miles per hour. The storm is forecast to make landfall along Florida's Gulf Coast on Wednesday. As of Monday afternoon, the storm is located about 105 miles west-northwest of Progreso, Mexico, and about 700 miles southwest of Tampa. The National Hurricane Center has issued flood watches for up to 15 million people across the Florida Peninsula, with 11 million at risk of tropical tornadoes through Tuesday and Wednesday. Governor Ron DeSantis gave an update on the storm.
Storm surge watch has been issued for the Florida Gulf Coast from mainland Monroe County to the Dixie-Levy County line. Possibility of 8 to 12 feet of storm surge is forecast from the Anclote River to Englewood, including Tampa Bay.
He also mentioned that Florida's emergency management efforts are actively responding to requests for resources related to the storm.
They've deployed everything from sandbags to shelf-stable meals to tens of thousands of water bottles to thousands of tarps. We've already sent truckloads of food and water to Central Florida in preparation for points of distribution site.
Officials urged residents to implement their preparedness plans, emphasizing that while there's still time to get ready, people must do so promptly.
If you're in the Tampa Bay area, you need to evacuate. If they have called for your evacuation order, I beg you, I implore you to evacuate. Drowning deaths due to storm surge are 100% preventable if you leave.
Officials in Hillsborough County warned residents to evacuate.
It's time to start implementing your evacuation plans, preparing your family, your pets, your property, and your businesses. Do it right now while the weather's still clear and you still have time. When it's time, before those impacts come, you need to be out of the evacuation zone.
Take advantage of this time. If you need sandbags, get some sandbags. You need those essential items. You need to relocate your loved ones. We're making it every resource that we can with this collaborative effort will be available. Again, to share one common goal. Common goal is to keep you and your families alive.
In mainland Florida and the Keys, 5 to 10 inches of rain could lead to flash and river flooding, with some areas potentially receiving up to 15 inches. Residents of Dade City, Florida, filled sandbags in preparation for Milton. This comes as the region is still recovering from Hurricane Helene, which flooded the same area less than 2 weeks ago.
It's really frustrating that the last hurricane came, the storm, and they've screwed around and haven't picked the debris up, and now they're scrambling to get it picked up. And if this one does hit, it's going to be flying missiles. Stuff's going to be floating, flying in the air.
At least 236 deaths are linked to Hurricane Helene and its aftermath. Widespread power outages persist in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Search efforts continue for hundreds still accounted for. Officials from Buncombe County, North Carolina, provided an update regarding assistance for residents in the city of Asheville.
New this morning, barring any unforeseen circumstances, non-potable water that can be used for flushing toilets will be available starting today at all county and city distribution sites. Chick-fil-A is distributing sandwiches and water at Swanano Ingalls at $22.99 US $70, beginning today through Friday.
She also announced that oxygen refilling stations are now open at several locations throughout the area. For missing persons, rescues, or wellness checks in North Carolina, Pinder advised visiting www.unitedwaync.org. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Will Congress return to D.C. early to approve an emergency aid package for victims of Hurricane Helene? The question is coming into focus as the federal government says they'll need more funds, while the GOP sharpens its criticism of the Biden administration's response. NTD's Melina Weisskopf reports.
Pressure is mounting on House and Senate leadership to call lawmakers back to D.C. early to give extra money to FEMA. President Biden over the weekend wrote to lawmakers highlighting the shortfall of funds specifically within the Small Business Administration's disaster relief program. He wrote to Congress telling them that it's critical that Congress ensures that no critical disaster programs run out of funding during the congressional recess period. But lawmakers are split on whether that emergency package is needed. There are some Republicans and Democrats who are eager to go back, while others, House Speaker Mike Johnson among them, want to wait until after the election. Over the weekend, the speaker joined the chorus of Republican criticism of the Fed's response to the hurricane.
We'll be back in session immediately after the election. That's 30 days from now.
And he's repeatedly emphasized that Congress already passed $20 billion in relief funds. Now, the federal government is giving $750 to hurricane victims. And while they say they do have the money to deal with the immediate needs right now, the DHS secretary just last week said that FEMA is running low on funds. Now, Republicans are expressing frustration that the DHS has been using money it shouldn't have on the migrant crisis.
The idea that we've spent $650 million in fiscal year 24 on the migrant crisis, that is infuriating to citizens of this country.
Now, the DHS denies that they've misallocated money or are currently using FEMA funds on the migrant crisis. They pointed this out on their rumor response page. Not only has the GOP been critical on the fiscal front, but also on the Fed's physical response.
That is what I'm so frustrated by. It's not the on-the-ground folks with FEMA who I think are doing everything that they can. It's the leadership of our country that I think is letting a lot of bureaucratic incompetence delay the delivery of necessary resources.
Now, at this point, it's unclear if lawmakers will actually return to D.C. before the election to pass that emergency package. The Senate appears more willing to do so, but then you have members in the House who are wanting to wait it out. Now, remember the political ramifications at play here. This does give each party a chance to pin blame on the other, essentially, because you have Republicans who can kind of criticize and point at the current administration for what they call a failure to respond efficiently, but then you see the administration can then point a finger at Republicans for not wanting to come back to Congress quickly to pass emergency funding. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
As Florida braces for the impact of another major storm, Hurricane Milton, President Biden declares an emergency in the state. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley is at the White House with more on preparations.
As Florida braces for the impact of Hurricane Milton, President Biden declared an emergency in that state. The emergency declaration sends the aid of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. They coordinate all disaster relief efforts. FEMA's pre-positioning resources near communities where the hurricane is expected to hit. Here's White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who, by the way, just received a promotion as a senior advisor to President Biden.
We have been in touch with state and local officials in order to be able to help the people of Florida who are going to be impacted, who were impacted certainly by Helene, and we're going to continue to certainly pre-position on the ground.
Hurricane Milton is currently a Category 5 storm and will make landfall on Wednesday evening on the west coast of Florida, but it's expected to die down slightly to a Category 4. But even so, the National Weather Service says that for this level of hurricane, anything in its path will be severely damaged, trees will be snapped and uprooted, and the area will have power outages and be uninhabitable for weeks or even months. This comes after the states in the southeast are still recovering from Hurricane Helene. Helene made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, which killed 230 people across 6 states. So far, FEMA has sent out over $210 million in federal assistance to individuals who are impacted. Biden also sent out another 500 active duty troops to North Carolina to help with recovery efforts over the weekend. That's on top of the 1,000 he made available to them last week. The White House says that there's misinformation that's causing people not to seek assistance from FEMA.
This is a falsehood. Disaster relief funds used on immigrants illegally in the U.S. The fact is, no money is being diverted from response needs. Another falsehood that's out there, FEMA will only provide $750 to disaster survivors to support their recovery. That is a falsehood. That is not true. The fact is, this is an upfront payment for urgent needs like food and medication. Many survivors will qualify for more assistance.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden took part in a candlelighting ceremony in commemoration of those lives lost 1 year ago on October 7th. Rabbi Aaron Alexander is a family friend of the Goldberg-Polin family. Hirsch Goldberg-Polin was abducted by Hamas on October 7th and held hostage for almost 11 months until he was murdered by Hamas. Monday morning, Biden expressed his condolences over the phone with Israeli President Isaac Herzog on the one-year anniversary of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks. President Biden reaffirmed his commitment to the safety of Israel and its right to defend itself from attacks by Iran and its proxies. Biden also lamented the Palestinian civilians' lives lost in Gaza who are caught in the middle of a war, many of which are used as human shields by terrorists. They also discussed their support for a hostage deal, which ends with Hamas never being able to control Gaza again. Reporting from the White House, Jack Bradley, NTD News.
A New York City official resigned on Monday. He's one of Mayor Eric Adams' senior public servants, as the mayor faces a federal probe. According to Adams on Monday, he accepted the resignation of Philip Banks, that's his deputy mayor for public safety. Adams said that Banks told him on Sunday that he wants to transition to other things. The resignation comes 1 month after federal agents seized devices from city officials, including Banks and his brother David Banks, who also announced his own resignation as school's chancellor. In total, 5 top administration officials have left office in the last month. Banks is the latest senior official to leave as the mayor fends off an indictment and calls to step down. Adams was indicted last month and accused of accepting illegal campaign contributions and bribes from foreign nationals. The mayor has pleaded not guilty. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. Today marks 1 year since Hamas terrorists raided Israeli communities. More than 1,200 people died in a surprise attack. Hundreds more taken hostage. Families gathered to remember their loved ones and demonstrated near the home of the Israeli Prime Minister. In Washington, D.C., Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband planted a pomegranate tree. She said it's a symbol of hope and righteousness. Former President Trump visited the New York City gravesite of a rabbi and followed a traditional Jewish custom. And VP candidate J.D. Vance pledged support for Israel and vowed to bring American hostages home. Hurricane Milton rapidly strengthened in the Gulf of Mexico, becoming a Category 5 hurricane. It's forecast to make landfall along Florida's Gulf Coast on Wednesday. Officials urged residents to put their preparedness plans into action. Joining us now to discuss Florida's preparations and how to keep your family safe is Florida Chief Financial Officer and State Fire Marshal Jimmy Petronis. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, President Biden approved Florida's emergency declaration ahead of Hurricane Milton, with much of the area still recovering from Hurricane Helene. What's Florida's message to citizens?
So right now is the time to evacuate, as this storm still has a strengthening that has taken place today, where it is a Category 5. It stands to be the most expensive storm in the history of the state of Florida, as the area of landfall is somewhere near St. Petersburg, Florida. That's in Pinellas County in the Tampa Bay region. Just that region alone, that's the most populous county per square mile of any county in the state of Florida. So it's also not only a very, area of concern, but it's the most populated area in the state.
I want to zoom in on that. Tampa in particular is still recovering from Hurricane Helene. Now, with expected 12-foot storm surges hitting the area, many saying this could be the hurricane Tampa has been dreading for decades. What level of damage might we see from Milton?
So there's been some conservative estimates. If it stays on the path today, as of the 2 p.m. forecast, that there would be $33 billion in losses, and that would just be in residential windstorm damage. That's not including automobiles or commercial or flood damage. So again, those are just insured losses for those that have windstorm protections. So there's also a trend that's showing that this could go from Category 5 to Category 3 right at landfall, which would put it somewhere near 125 miles an hour.
And what preparations does Florida have in place to protect and aid Floridians?
So evacuation shelters have been open throughout the affected areas. There's a very large cone of certainty where this storm is going to make landfall. Within about 10 miles of that flood zone area are shelters, and those shelters will be able to house people, keep them safe, and then ultimately, hopefully return to their homes soon enough. But as the silver lining to this is the building code in Florida ever since Hurricane Andrew has been significantly increased, and the homes are more resilient than they were, say, 20 years ago. But still, it's a huge concern that we're going to face here in Florida, as at least those have experienced Hurricane Helene know that the threat is there. So we feel like the evacuations will probably be more inclined to heed the warnings and seek safety simply because of the threat they just experienced with Hurricane Helene.
And Tampa's airport is expected to close Tuesday morning. Now, reports are coming in stating that cars evacuating the Fort Myers area are backed up for miles, with many gas stations already out of fuel. What can people do to prepare given this? What advice would you give them?
Well, the good thing is evacuations don't need to be to another state. Your evacuation model should be within 20 miles of your home. And that's where there's a line of shelters. All the shelters are set off of the coastal areas. So, the story is you run from water, you hide from wind. So the shelters are put in such a way where they're out of any storm surge threat. So then those that decide to evacuate hundreds of miles away, it's an extreme, it's a precaution that they're deciding to take, but it's also, what leads to the type of congestion and challenges that we'll see. Also, some of the runs that we have on fuel, but fuel is flowing, and we are, doubling down all of our highway patrol on the roads to make sure that traffic moves as smoothly as possible, since it is such a large area of potential impact.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has expanded the state of emergency. Now, headlines say this is the worst storm in 5 years. What characterizes that distinction?
So I think it'll be the worst storm that we've had in the history of the state. What characterizes the potential losses financially? In the case with Hurricane Ian, it was $20 billion in losses. Andrew, in today's numbers, was about $24 billion in losses. So you can see where this storm, also because it's hitting the most densely populated area, that means more dwellings, more houses, more businesses. It could exceed that. But it also depends on where the storm ultimately makes landfall, and also if it does weaken as it gets closer to shore, which the modeling is showing that seems to be the case.
Now, fire danger is not something that immediately comes to mind when thinking about a hurricane, but it is something you're strongly warning about. Give us a sense what fire dangers are present when natural disaster like this hit, especially with the rise in, say, EVs and lithium batteries.
So the data that we had earlier today, we've had from Hurricane Helene in the state of Florida, 48 lithium-ion battery fires, I believe 9 of which were EVs. So when we even have circumstances where a lithium-ion powered wheelchair caught fire, these then lead, the house may survive, but the batteries, if not respected, the scooters, the e-bikes, the golf carts, the EVs, then lead to the event that we saw in Clearwater, where the EV in the garage flooded and then ultimately burned down the house. So we have identified, just through automobile registration, in the cone of certainty of where the storm is going to make landfall, over 55,000 EV hybrid vehicles. So we're going to start to put a very loud announcement of how we need to make sure those are moved away from the flood zones so we don't have other problems after the storm leaves the state.
With what you just laid out there, what are some safety tips that people can do ahead of the storm to prevent that?
Well, what I appreciate is, like, for example, what the city of Tampa offered yesterday. All of their parking garages are going to be free of charge. So that doesn't only benefit just the EV owners, but also anybody who has an automobile that wants to keep it from being flooded. So getting these items away from your house, getting them in a parking garage, getting them elevated, but just simply getting them away from storm surge. If your EV is somewhere, within 10 miles of the shore or more, you're probably going to be okay. But you also want to make sure that you don't leave in your house plugged up scooters, hoverboards, golf carts, any of these other items that saltwater intrusion. Saltwater and lithium do not mix. It creates what's called a thermal runaway. And this is a fire that cannot be put out with water. You can't put it out until the fuel is exhausted. This is what makes these so dangerous. Fantastic technology, but has some sensational drawbacks if not respected.
Jimmy Petronas, Florida Chief Financial Officer and State Fire Marshal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A Russian court today sentencing an American citizen to nearly 7 years in prison. Meanwhile, a major transit agreement between Russia and Ukraine is set to expire, affecting multiple European nations. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pazdar has the Russia update.
72-year-old American Stephen James Hubbard was convicted on charges of serving as a mercenary for Ukraine. Russian media reported that Hubbard pleaded guilty, but his family questioned the confession. They told Reuters he held pro-Russian views and was unlikely to have taken up weapons at his age. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, 18 civilians are injured after 4 Russian glide bombs struck civilian infrastructure in the Ukrainian city of Kherson on Monday. That's according to local Ukrainian authorities. They say a 3-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl are among the injured.
First, there was one strike that blew out all the windows. I grabbed the 2 children and started rushing out of the room. Then the second strike hit, and everything was falling down.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday said that the situation in the Donetsk region remains especially challenging.
We will try to convince our partners at the upcoming Ramstein meeting of the urgent need for the significant reinforcement of our capabilities.
And President Biden is also set to attend the Ramstein meeting, as the White House said on Monday.
What this visit is going to do, it's going to underscore the deep commitment and that transatlantic security, resolute support. If you think about Ukraine and the self-defense of Ukraine, that's going to be a big part of this visit.
Meanwhile, on the island of Crimea, fires burned at an oil depot after a possible drone attack. Russian and Ukrainian telegram channels claimed that Ukrainian drones attacked an oil terminal. This comes as Ukraine's prime minister meets his Slovak counterpart on Monday to talk about energy production.
The strategic goal of Ukraine is to impose sanctions on the Russian gas sector, to deprive the Kremlin of profits from the sale of hydrocarbons with which the aggressor finances the war.
Ukraine says it won't renew a key transit agreement with Russia after it expires. The deal allows Russia to transport oil and gas through Ukraine. The agreement was made before the conflict broke out. Central European countries rely on Russian gas delivered through pipelines that cross Ukraine.
We understand the acute dependency of some states, including Slovakia, from this resource. We expect gradual diversification of supplies.
Slovakia's prime minister says he hopes Ukraine will continue to use the pipelines to supply Europe with oil and gas. Ariane Pazdar, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 2 American scientists have won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their work on the discovery of microRNA. Victor Ambrose and Gary Runkun's research revealed gene regulation by microRNA. That's how genes give rise to different cells within the human body. The Nobel Prize Committee praised Ambrose and Runkun's work as a groundbreaking discovery.
I was able to wake up Gary Runken. So I think he had a landline. I was able to reach him. His wife answered, and it took a long time before he came to the phone and sounded very tired. But he quite rapidly was quite excited and happy when he understood what it was all about.
Ambrose is a professor of natural science at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. Ruvkun is a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School. They first made the discovery of microRNA in 1993, but it was initially thought irrelevant to humans. The Nobel Prize carries a cash award of $1 million. The 189th Munich Oktoberfest is over after 6.7 million visitors attended this year's event. Revelers capped off the world's largest beer festival over the weekend. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the details.
The final day of Oktoberfest in the Bavarian capital of Munich was marked by the traditional gun salute. Hundreds of onlookers listened to the brass band accompanying the ceremony. The head of the two-week-long party says the event went smoothly.
We had high numbers of reported crimes, but the figures are considerably lower than last year, especially against women and drunken youths. That was important to me, and here the numbers are a lot lower than last year. That shows our media campaign worked, and we ensured that this Oktoberfest was a safe and wonderful festival.
Attendees consumed around 7 million liters of beer, down from 7.2 million last year.
We saw during halftime already that last year a lot more was eaten and drank, and the trend continued. I would say that this trend shows that the Oktoberfest offers quality in food and drink, and as an event overall. It has always been important to me to offer a quality festival and not to chase records in terms of visitors, but of quality. We succeeded, and that makes me proud.
The heavy glass beer mugs appeared popular with visitors this year. 98,000 of them were confiscated from people trying to smuggle them out of the beer tents. In 2023, a total of 115,000 glass mugs were returned to the brewers. But police said the crime rate during this year's Oktoberfest fell by 25%. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.